Hello, everybody. It's a real privilege to be here this evening, and I've started my timer because I'm known for waffling on. So great to be here. I'm going to be talking this evening about the partnership between the NHS and also our other public sector organizations and Eden, and how together we might build more wellness in society. Now, I'm really interested by three questions. Why? What? And how? Why does wellness and health matter? Well, in 19th century France, there was a philosophical battle royale between two great giants of the scientific world. On one side, we had Louis Pasteur, pasteurization of milk. He said that we must create health by preventing disease and killing disease. On the other side of the argument was Antoine Béchamp. He said, no, I disagree. If we're going to be well, we must create environments that help us to be well. If we do that, then illness will be far from us. Well, Pasteur won the argument, and for the last 150 years, we've been thinking about health in terms of how we prevent people getting unwell and how we make them better once they are unwell. And we've achieved some amazing things together as a result. We've seen mass immunization. We've seen the advent of antibiotics and the development of chemotherapy, to name just three. But I think Béchamp might ask us whether or not we are truly well. You see, here in Morecambe Bay, if you live in Overkellet and walk the 6 miles down the wild and rugged coast into the heart of Morecambe, your life expectancy decreases by 15 to 16 years. We are currently facing quite a significant mental health crisis in our young people. We have an epidemic of type 2 diabetes. We have some really difficult and tough health issues that we're facing into, and in the NHS, we have declining staff morale and really high levels of staff burnout. And every 3 weeks, another one of our doctors nationally takes their own life. And so we might ask ourselves whether or not we are really, truly well. And yet here in Morecambe, where health is supposed to abound in this place that beauty surrounds and nature does indeed astound, it's really important that we see health and wellness both as a social justice issue as well as being a human rights issue. Surely it isn't okay that a child born in certain parts of this bay can expect to live in such poorer health for so much more of their life and then expect to die sooner than someone who could live just a couple of neighborhoods away. That's why this matters. So what might we do about it together, and why does a partnership like Eden become so important? There's a fairly well-known saying in business, is there not, that culture eats strategy for breakfast. Have you heard that? So I've become really fascinated in my work as Director of Population Health here in Morecambe Bay about how we create the kind of cultures that enable us to build wellness together. And I have to say that not just with Sai, but with so many other members of the Eden team, it has been amazing to find that the kind of culture that we're trying to create in the NHS, in the way that we work in the public sector here in the Bay, in the way that we're trying to work with our communities radically differently, we find the same heart connection, the same kind of culture in Eden. And I think there are 5 key foundation stones to that culture that we're trying to establish together that will allow us to build this kind of wellness back in society. And they happen to begin with the letters H, I, J, K, and L. The first is hope. You know, every morning when I listen to the news and when I switch on my TV to catch up on what's happening in this election cycle, there is much that makes me feel despairing and hopeless. There's so much that we're facing into in terms of the climate emergency that we find ourselves in, and so many of the issues in our society right now that could easily lead to us feeling depressed and down. But hope is not built by focusing on everything that is wrong and on everything that is going terribly. Hope is found when we focus on what is possible despite the differences, despite the difficulties that we face. And one of the things that Eden brings to us right now in Morecambe Bay is a sense of hope. That together we really could create the kind of future in which people together can be well. The second thing that it does, and that I've loved watching in terms of how we're beginning to work together, is a sense of inclusivity. One of the greatest privileges of my work over the last few years has been to get involved in something called the Poverty Truth Commission. What that does is it takes people who have kind of expertise in poverty through lived experience, with those of us who have perhaps more strategic leadership positions, and it brings us together to really hear each other and listen to one another with a sense of humility and openness and kindness. And one of the things that I've seen most impact me, I think, is that sense of really needing to embrace a new humility. That we don't know what other people live in and with until we're willing to encounter them and hear their story. And one of the things that I've seen Eden do again and again in consultations is they've really come and they've listened to people in this bay. They've been people who've had the humility to say, tell us the story of your lives. Tell us what's really going on in the communities here. And not then just come and plonked a model on the top of it and said, we're going to do this to you. It's really been a sense of partnership, of inclusivity, of togetherness that says, you know what, how do we find a way through together? How do we build something that involves all of us, that is for all of this community, no matter who you are, no matter where you're from, no matter what your background, no matter what your starting place? That is a beautiful culture. It's something we could all learn from together. And there's an Aboriginal saying that is that I cannot be well unless you are well. We have to find that back in our communities, that sense of really knowing that I can't be well if the person a few streets away is not well. That regrowing of community together is something we must rediscover if we're going to build wellness back into our communities. Thirdly, it means joy. Helping one another reconnect with our passions, who we are as human beings, is something truly amazing and beautiful. Many of you will have heard over the last number of months this whole idea of social prescribing. That lots of times people come and see me as a GP, and sometimes I sit there and I wish that there was something I could do for the person. But a lot of the time, people come looking to the doctor for a bit of help, and there is no help necessarily to give. But the idea of social prescribing is to help people connect back with their raw passions, what keeps them healthy and well in the first place. And it's one of the things that I'm so glad that Eden are massively involved with and open up a whole realm of possibilities for us in how we connect people back to their passions, what makes them a human being. If we could create that sense of joy, last night I had the real joy of conducting Carnforth Community Choir. As a surgery, we chatted with over 1,000 people in our town about 5 years ago. And we said, what would help us be more healthy and well as a town? And consistently people said, we want a place to sing together. And now every Monday night, 100 people together from 3 generations, from the age of 7 through to 95, get together and we sing. And last night we gave a concert at Carnforth Community School. And we had an amazing evening together, singing. The stuff that brings us joy in the life, keeps us healthy and well. Fourthly, we need to create the kind of culture that is kind. When I was training as a doctor, I walked into my tutorial one day and let out a big sigh. And my tutor, being a very nice and kind and responsive person, said, "Oh, Andy, what is wrong? What's wrong?" And I said, I've just had one of those real heart sink patients. You know, the kind of person that just walks into your room and they just come back again and again with the same problem and nothing ever changes." And she said, "Whoa." She said, "Let me stop you right there." She said, "If your heart sinks when a person comes into your room, the problem is not with the person, it's with your heart." She said, "Get a bigger heart." She said, "Be kinder. You don't get to look at someone else's life and judge them because you've never walked in their shoes. You have never lived their life. You do not have to walk back into their life when they leave your room. How much more beautiful is it when we have a society that is kind to one another, that believes the best of one another, that wants the best for one another?" And I see that kindness in Eden and in the way that they work. And it's part of the culture that we need to rediscover together in such a time of opposition and adversary. And then, lastly, and I unashamedly use this word, and it may be embarrassing to some of you, but I believe we have to have a culture that is full of love. It is our foundation stone. It is the reason why we get out of bed in the morning. It is the thing that enables us to know that we belong in the world, that we are seen, that we are valued just for who we are. Love is the beginning and it is the end. It is the thing that allows us to forgive one another when things get wrong. My work in Sierra Leone after the genocide there taught me that. My work in South Africa after apartheid taught me that. We have to be people who can forgive against the odds if we're going to discover the kind of society together in which we can all be well. And so, how do we do it? We know why we need it, because right now there's so much injustice and there's so much hurt. We know that we need to do it by changing our culture, but how? What are we going to do? Well, there's a great thinker called John Paul Lederach who's written a book called The Moral Imagination. And he says that if we're going to change society together, if we're really going to see a social movement of wellness back in society, there are two things that we need to take really seriously. He says, changing culture in society and building well-being through society, you can think of it as a spider spinning a web. But for a spider to spin a web, it needs anchor points. So I suppose what I'm asking, and what I believe Eden is one of those anchor points. But Eden alone is not enough. It takes those of us who work in the NHS, in the council, in business, in all kinds of different areas of life together here in this bay to recognize that the institutions we work in become anchors for a new kind of society together, a kinder, more well society. And so I'm asking you to think about how your own organization becomes its own anchor point to create this kind of culture, this wellness together in society. But the other thing Lederach talks about is what he calls critical yeast. It takes less people than you think, but it takes people. And it takes you as an individual being willing enough to be a catalyst for change in your environment. When you look at a loaf of bread, you don't see or even necessarily taste the yeast, but boy, do you see its effect. If Eden is going to be a success in Morecambe Bay, and if we are going to build the kind of society together that really brings about change, not only do we need anchor points within our own institutions to be that change, we need to make sure that we as individuals become those people of critical yeast who explode this kind of culture together where we are. You see, alone, we cannot create wellness in society. But together, as we join on to one another and we take ourselves and our organization seriously in partnership with others, just like Eden, we really can create wellness back in our communities and in this society. Thank you.